My screen? I hope. I'm going to assume yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
Market
Yep,
access.
that's what we do. Cool. So today we're going to be talking about Storybook, which is specifically in the context of building Web3 for Web3. Storybook, as they describe it, is an open source tool for building UI components and pages in isolation, streamlines UI development, testing, and documentation. And you'll see how that works today in this talk. So what I'd like to achieve, maybe you guys will agree, is that I'd like to have you guys understand what Storybook is, and then learn how Storybook helps with software development in general, and then also see some specific ways that Storybook can help with building dApps in particular. So there's going to be some slides, but this is mostly going to be a practical demo with some actual code and some actual tools. So I did leave my offering for the demo gremlins this morning, but you know how they are. They don't always accept what you give them. So if anything breaks or technical difficulties ruins this whole thing, you have my advanced apologies. So the problem and the reason that Storybook, the tool, exists is UIs are complicated, and they're actually very complicated, and they are painfully complicated. And this image on the right isn't actually far off from what it looks busier than what we're used to with our UIs, but in terms of the complexity that lives underneath them, it's actually even more complicated than this, especially with regards to the code. And so the way that software developers in general manage this kind of complexity is we use something called component-based architecture, where, and I'm sure most of you guys have seen diagrams like this before, where you essentially have parts that are composed of smaller parts and so on all the way down. So the analogy that we very often use in UI development is we talk about atoms and molecules and compounds, where the atoms are essentially things like a button and some text, and then molecules are the things that contain those, like cards, banners, and so on. Compounds are whole sections, pages, and you could say that our whole app is a complicated chemistry experiment. And the reason we do this, and the reason we have this component-based architecture, is twofold. So it lets us reuse those bits and pieces. We can achieve consistency, and also we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to re-engineer a button every time we need a button. And then we also are more easily able to reason about this whole complicated system, like this huge complicated molecule is easier to comprehend when you see that most of these things are actually just the same thing that's been repeated many times over, and they come together to form this complex whole. So how Storybook helps us to do that is it lets us formalize component-based architecture in terms of UIs. So you'll see exactly what I mean in a minute when we start looking at the actual Storybook itself. So you build an app that has components, and inside of that app we have a component library, and the component library is defined inside of the Storybook, which you'll see shortly. So you're probably wondering what actually is a story anyway, and you might be familiar with the idea of a user story. So like the user clicks on this button and then such and such a thing happens. So that's a pretty old school way of thinking about UIs, and we don't usually think about them like that anymore. But the idea of a story is still useful to us when we think about the different use cases of a given piece of a user interface. So in our case, a story is a special code file that tells Storybook, our tool, how to render a component. So like a button. We tell it what values the button's expecting to see, how that button should react and behave, how it should appear, and everything else it needs to know. So to start giving you guys a bit more context, let's take a look at the story for a UI component that I'm pretty sure most of you guys have seen before, the button. So this over here is Storybook itself. So you'll see we've got a button right over here. This is our button. You can see we can hover over it. And we have on the left-hand side what we would call stories for many different components, like a mount input button, checkbox, and so on. And each of these different stories, so each one of these different options over here, represent a different use case or state of the component. So you might have heard before of having like a primary button or a secondary button or a tertiary button. And these are all different ways that the button can exist. It could be, for example, it could be disabled, or it could have custom dimensions. All of these different things, we can represent them as stories. And like if you're a UI UX person or a developer, you can probably already see why this is really, really convenient to be able to have control over it like this, and to be able to build each of your different pieces on their own like this. And what makes Storybook really, really cool is that you can actually change the different values dynamically like this with the controls. So like, for example, if I wanted to see what it would look like if I had a primary button and it also had a really long string of text in it, for example, we can see that this button was built in such a way that it could actually handle a really long string of text. And that lets us do all kinds of cool quality assurance stuff to determine that it is in fact behaving the way that we want it to behave. So I can show you like a more complicated example. Like we can, let me just reset this zoom over here. Like we have different panels in our app, the UMA app that we're busy building now. And like you can see here, the entire panel lives inside of Storybook. And we can actually test and play with each of the different parts of these panels on their own. And this thing behaves as if it was part of the live app, which is really cool because that way we can, like in isolation, actually check that everything is working correctly. So that's personally for me why I find this really useful, even as a solo developer. Like maybe you're working on a hackathon project or something like that. Like I know a lot of you guys might be participating in ETH Global coming up. I was actually a finalist in ETH Global last year. And if I had used this tool, it would have made my life so much easier. I really wish that I had set this up for our app, because there were many, many times where I was wrestling with building components on their own and like chucking them onto a page in the app and testing it like that. And if I had have used this, it would have been so much easier. So can I pause there for a quick second and ask if anyone has any questions or is interested in anything that you saw here you'd like me to elaborate on before I move on? Going once, twice, cool. All right, so now Chromatic is actually the company that builds Storybook. They're the maintainers of Storybook. And they have a pretty clever business model. So Storybook itself is a free and open source tool that anybody can use. But what the product that is linked to it, and that Chromatic, the company, produces, is essentially the ability to deploy a Storybook to a live cloud workspace. So that Storybook that we were looking at over here, this actually lives live on a URL right now that everybody in the team can have access to and to play with whenever they like. So you can publish your Storybook, which is great. We can request feedback. So you could actually, anybody, like say, for example, you wanted to, let me just take this off of full screen. So you can see here in this URL panel, there's a URL for each one of these components. So if you wanted to copy and paste that URL and give it to me and say, hey, this particular thing over here, I don't like it, then you could do so. And you can also, you can link them directly with Figma, which is something I'll show you guys just now. So I wanted to walk you guys through the process of how somebody who is not even actually involved in the development or the design could easily use this tool to provide feedback to the developers and have that to and actually very quickly see that be executed and appear in production. So a while ago, so I actually went and intentionally undid a change that I made a while ago so that I could use it as an example here. So we have this remind me panel that we are building for the new DApp, where you'll be able to subscribe either through emails or through your browser to be notified when the different commit and reveal phases end. And in our browser reminder, we've got this toggle over here, this little toggle switch. And when I was demoing the storybook to our team, Hart, our founder, he noticed that this green toggle button, in contrast with the red of Uma, has a bit too much of a Christmas tree vibe. So, like red and green, it's a little too festive. And so the designer who designed it and myself, we looked at it and we did actually agree that that the green is probably not the right way to go. So if we take a look here in the storybook, we actually have a story specifically for this toggle over here. So, and then also if we head over to the Figma for this, you can see that we've got the different, here's the actual design. And this is actually one of my favorite features of Storybook. So this component is linked to the deployed Storybook right now. And we can see here, so Hart, he said that he would prefer for it to be red. And I want to show you just how easily we would be able to change that. So if we take a look here at the code, right? So here we've got the toggle story. So I'm trying not to dive too deep into code, but I would like you guys to have some understanding of how the code looks. So this story is essentially a program, a code file that describes how it should look and how it should behave. So we've got two different stories here. We've got not clicked and clicked, and they actually show up in the story. So sorry, I'm losing my storybook, should be on this side. Yeah, so you can see here clicked and not clicked. And if we were to switch between the two, you can see it like this. So we want to now go and change the color so that it actually matches the red as it was described here. So we can just go right into the code and we can see that the background is green when it's been clicked and we want that to be red. So we can just change this to red. Perfect. Normally you would take a look at the local version of the storybook first, but since I've already done this, I know that it works. So we can just commit here that we want to do, make it less Christmas vibes. Cool, perfect. And then we can just sync that. And now, so that's going to our GitHub, and we can then, once this is done, we can deploy Chromatic. So what this is doing is it is sending this change that we just made over to Chromatic. And you'll see now why this is so cool, which is that it will allow us to do what's called a visual diff, where it will essentially show us exactly how the UI will look different after making this particular change. And that is super, super powerful, because if you accidentally made a change that screwed something up and made it look awful in some other place that you didn't notice, this thing will actually pick it up, because it's now going to go and compare how all of your different stories looked before and how they look after having made this change. So you'll see exactly what that means in a second. We're just waiting for it to finish publishing. Maybe while it does that, I'll quickly show you a little bit more of the code. So you can see each of these different stories, like as button primary, as button hover, as button disabled. They're all defined as constants in this code file. And we have what we call args. These are those controls that you saw where you could flip different switches, and you can define them in code over here. So that's how we're able to say what arguments we want the components to have, and then also change them in the storybook itself. Cool. So this is now done, and it's saying that it's found a visual change. So it's possible that you change the code and everything looks the same, and then it would say, cool, go right ahead. But in this case, it's saying, actually, it's noticed that something does in fact look different. And it's asking me now to review the change. So it's saying, after having done this change, ooh, that looks weird. It should be totally just red. Let's inspect this. There we go. Yeah. So it's saying that now after having made this change, it is going to be read like that, which is actually exactly what we want. It hasn't made any other weird changes anywhere else. And that's what we want to see. So we'll accept this change. And now if we were to go to our component library, so this is where everything is defined. So we could look at all of our buttons and charts and everything else. And we go to our storybook, we should see that the toggle has been updated exactly as we would like it to have been. So magic, cool. So, and then also if we were to go over to our Figma and refresh this, then it should be that, oh no, okay, come on, refresh. It should eventually, technical gremlins are on my case, but it should eventually update in order to show you the updated thing here. And also if we were to go and look in our panel, and if we were to go to the remind panel, then also we'll see that it's been updated here. And that makes it super easy for developers and designers to communicate with each other. And it makes it a lot easier for people to do QA and to check that everything's working. Yeah, I personally think it's a really, really useful and cool workflow. So before I move on to the next part, which is how this is particularly useful for Web3 UIs, I just wanted to pause and ask if anyone has any questions or comments. I see people are asking about red for on. That's none of my business. I'm not a UI UX designer. I'm taking a neutral stance here. I have no comment on that. But yeah, anyone got any questions maybe?
Questions or comments, guys? Do we think that green with a red layout is too Christmassy, like I think, or not? I agree with Matt. We should spend the rest of this meeting.
Yellow as well.
I also think you guys are being culturally insensitive because red means different things in different cultures here. So, you know.
Pretty sure red is like one of the universal stop signs. It's
but it means like, what's it mean in Chinese?
Go, or well, I mean, I think it's like an auspicious thing. Like red, like in Chinese culture, is like it means good fortune.
Yeah, luck, joy, happiness. Luck, joy, happiness, celebration, vitality, and fertility. So, you know, seems like an on button to me. Anyways, point is, I think this stuff is pretty cool. Does anybody have any other comments for Ryan before he moves on to part 2?
No? All right. So the reason that Storybook has been super useful for me as a dApp developer in particular is that it's really, really difficult to replicate the circumstances that arise from actions on the blockchain. So, you know, things like transactions, events, like they can be slow and they can be fickle. So if you are relying on performing actions in your wallet and then waiting to see them propagate every single time you made a change just to see that it actually works, it's a massive pain. And Storybook lets you mock the data while you're building and then wire it up later when you're ready. So to show you guys what I mean, one of the things that I find particularly cool about Storybook is that if we take a look at the application itself, right? So like, I mean, I'm not expecting people to be familiar with the code, but if you take a look at the code in the application and you take a look at the code in the Storybook, it's basically the same. The environment is essentially the same. So when it comes to things like your wallets and your querying the graph and so on, it's a one-to-one mapping that's exactly the same. And what I mean by that is, if we take a look at our wallet component here in the Storybook, and we click connect wallet, it's gonna actually connect the wallet. You know, like let's connect MetaMask. Oh gee, we're going full screen here. Let's connect test. Cool. And so we've legit connected here, you know, and also so we have extra signing logic as well in our dApp, and it's doing the signature as well. And now if we go and we look at like the menu panel, the wallet's connected. So that what we just did there is propagated throughout the entire app. And that lets you build stuff like a wallet in isolation by itself. So like here in the header, we've got our wallet connected here as well. So that like in and of itself is super, super helpful, because then you can have that on its own. But then also you can have a combination of those things. So like when we have our vote panel, for example, here, this is just mock data that is supposed to come from the chain, but isn't coming from the chain yet. But we can model the result of this as we need it to. And then we can also go and we can change the data. Like we could even change the graph, like we can remove things and have it be like that's what the result would be like if there were only two options. And so that essentially gives us so much freedom to develop without needing to wait for calls to the chain every single time, but at the same time be context aware of the chain itself. So we don't need to make a compromise between either having just mock data or having just on-chain data, but actually have stuff that is, in my opinion, a happy medium between the two. Yeah, this went actually quite a lot quicker than I thought. I thought there would be more questions along the way, but like, does anyone else have anything else that they'd like to ask about, like how this whole thing works? Maybe walk through some more components.
Ryan, sorry, go ahead, Art.
No. Evan, you first. I've got an obnoxious comment.
Ryan, you and I kind of had this conversation before, because I'm thinking of like content stories we could like, pump out there. But are there like, when you're looking at Web3 dApps, are there like common, what's the word, like mistakes or problems that you see time and time again?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like even just things like, how do you deal with connecting a wallet? How do you determine whether a wallet is connected or not? How do you handle disconnecting when that isn't actually possible? Like it's always just an illusion because you can't really disconnect someone's wallet from the app. Those sort of things haven't been decided. So like what is the best practice? It's not established yet because it's so new. So yeah, I do see a lot of things, but it's interesting because it's not like I can say, oh, this is the obvious common problem that everybody does, and they should always just do it like this, and that would solve everything. Because that, like, the obvious thing that they should do is oftentimes just totally undecided at this point.
I just want to add a little bit to that, to what you said, Ryan. I want to emphasize to the group that like connecting wallets is one of those simple things that like seems so easy and is so hard on the front end. Every dApp we've built in our entire history, this has been messed up, some, right? It's like we've messed it up in different ways. And it's because it's really, really hard. It gets extra hard also when you're trying to allow people to connect their wallet to multiple different chains in the same dApp. So for instance, the across dApp, we had a whole new world of problems because people want to switch their wallets, and sometimes the wallet that they're using doesn't appropriately communicate which chain they're actually connected to. So you send their wrong transaction on the wrong chain. We've actually black holed money because the wallet software didn't tell our dApp what chain they were connected to. So it's a very, very, very hard problem in dApps. I'd probably say it's the hardest problem in dApps right now.
So my obnoxious comment, Ryan, is does anyone think this is like a bad idea or that there's a better option?
Ryan, how much how much work does this add to like the dApp process? So, obviously you get a lot of advantages, but do you think that there's extra work you're putting in to make this Storybook thing work and to, because in some ways it's like a communication tool or kind of a tool to a prototyping tool. So do you think it adds extra code you have to write and overhead to building a dApp?
So in my experience, it's only saved me time. So like, for example, if you're trying to build a button, you need to write some code to put that button on the screen so that you can see it, because otherwise you can't build it. So like you're gonna have to do something to put the button there. And that can be really inconvenient, like, I mean, it's like a stupid example, like, oh, just put a button in the middle of a page and then you fiddle with it. But then like, what about different screen sizes? What about all these different states? Like, just having a thing that you can use to define that stuff and then just go and write your styles and write your code and then check that it works is way, way faster than the alternative, which is basically like putting it there and then discovering later that you forgot something. So I wouldn't even if you couldn't deploy it to Chromatic and use it to share and show people and use it to get feedback and so on, even if you couldn't do any of those things, I would still want to use it because it's made my life easier, even in the beginning when I wasn't communicating at all with people and I was just setting stuff up on my own.
Ryan, what I really liked about the last example you gave was how, from a development perspective, it forces you to think about the data structure, the state, independently of actually working with the blockchain. So then it kind of gives whoever is working with the blockchain, sort of collecting all that data, an interface to like work with the UI. And it's nice to have that stuff up front. And it's always like a question of who designs that, but with this, I think there's a clear kind of distinction of sort of like the component builder is actually dictating what the state is that they need, which I think is the right thing.
Absolutely, yeah, and that actually made life a lot easier for me. So now we're at the stage for the V2 dApp, where Voter dApp, where we are making calls to the graph and making queries to the chain, and it's now already known what exactly we need to get, or what parts are missing, or what parts need to be transformed in order to give the data to the components correctly. And that has been super helpful, and I think a huge time save as well, because just having that information available up front, you can write functions that transform the data appropriately the first time, instead of discovering later on that you actually forgot X, Y, and Z component parts of the UI, like what happens if it's committed or not committed or whatever, like the stuff that you might have potentially forgotten, because you already wired it into the storybook, and because you were doing that, you already defined it as props that are going into a component. Now that was known ahead of time, and your chances of missing something are so much lower.
Ryan, for non-technical people watching this, I guess I have two questions or comments. The first is like, this looks like a WYSIWYG kind of editor thing, but I don't know if that's actually what it is. And the other comment is like, how should the communications and community team sort of think about Storybook, if at all? Like, does it affect, maybe like a community member asks a question about the UI or gives us feedback, or like how, what do you want?
Absolutely,
Clayton?
yeah. Let me walk you through an example of something that I know we're going to be doing soon. So if we take a look at these panels, right, like we've got this claim panel. So you can see here it says, earn even more rewards, blah, 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 these rewards text to do, right? So that's obviously not ideal. So this is going to be like, we're going to send this URL to, this is going to be how people will communicate and say like, okay, no, it obviously shouldn't say that. And then we'll be able to refer specifically to this exact component, and we'll be able to use this URL and say, cool, for this claim panel, this should change so that it says X, Y, and Z thing instead. And actually, so I haven't wired that up here yet, but you will be able to. So right now, the only thing that's wired up here is the claimable rewards, but you will be able to actually just go and change the text yourself. So like the copywriter would have an option over here where they could go and they could change the text and then see how it looks, and then we could essentially agree on what the text should say by actually writing it directly into the component. So that in my, like, as someone who's done copywriting before, it can be super helpful to actually see it visualized in the context of the component itself. So you'll be able to use that for QA, like extensive. And also I would encourage you to go and fiddle with the values and try and break it, you know, like see if you can put something in there that looks terrible, or that makes it render incorrectly, or that just makes it not work. So that's giving power to technical or non-technical, you know, anybody can go and change some stuff in a text box and see if it breaks everything. And if you do happen to break everything, then you can let us know, and that could potentially save us like major problems in production.
And okay, you said save us major problems in production. If I went in there and changed something, it would basically look like a pull request that someone would have to merge. Is it sort of like the GitHub model?
No one would be able to know what you change. Well, so you could actually, what's cool about about these inputs is that it actually, if you go and you fiddle with stuff, so I just need to minimize this again. But if you were to go and like actually change stuff in here, like let's say change panel type to claim or whatever. I guess this isn't the best, or panel open, but you can see like this is a stupid example, but like the panel open is actually changing the URL. So if you were to go and fiddle with this thing, then the URL would reflect that. So you could copy and paste this URL and send it to me. So I would be able to see exactly what you did. And then I would be able to know from there how the code needs to change. So it wouldn't require, it would be still up to the developer to make a pull request and actually change the code. But it would at least give you the ability to communicate it much more easily. You wouldn't need to do things like use screenshots with marks on the screenshots and so on.
Interesting. I mean, this is going to be relevant very, very soon, right? Because we're going to be working on copy for this thing you're showing for the voter dApp. And sorry if you covered this, I did show up a minute late, but what, excuse me, what do we do? Do we have to download an app, or is this web-based? Like, how do we, what's our login account, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you will just have a URL and that's it. So
can you send one in the chat we can play around with or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me 1 second. Just went and lost it. Cool, there we go. Yeah, so the way it will always be is it'll be master, which is the branch. So we're talking about the master branch. Our code, like that's our id.chromatic.com. So that will always take you to the correct URL. So this is the canonical master branch, although it is probably going to change to main. I don't know why Next.js is behind the times and using master when you spin up a branch, because it should use main. But for now, master is going to be the canonical branch. So yeah, anybody can go. Also, so we discussed this and we decided to make our storybook public. So by default, a storybook is only actually accessible to members of a GitHub organization. But since we do everything in the open and publicly, we decided to make the storybook itself publicly available as well.
Oh, interesting. And so, yeah, I guess, like, again, I'm sorry if this is a repeated question, but this is essentially, it's like a way to generate really good feedback to give you, because you can actually like apply your feedback directly, and then but it doesn't change anything in production until you pull the trigger, basically.
Yeah, no. So you can't change anything through the storybook. Yeah, so the storybook is just it's just like a website that you can fiddle with, basically, but you can then use that to communicate with us. And then so going forward as well, we want to make a generic version of our storybook with our components available that can actually be forked and used by other people like hackathon contestants and so on. So they can, say, for example, use our wallet component that they can play with, see that it works the way that they want, and then fork our UI and steal the parts that they need. And then use our storybook as a reference for building their own.
Interesting. So I'm looking at a page right now. How do I, like, I can select the text, but how do I actually sort of get into edit mode?
Well, it depends. So they haven't all been wired up yet. So I apologize for that. Like, I haven't been,
gotcha.
I haven't fully wired up all of the text to be editable yet. So the design was in flux. So I didn't do that yet, but it will be. But by the time you guys we're handing it over for copywriting, they will every field of text like that will be changeable.
Which kind of, like, in the vote page drop folder, which one can I look at that has been wired? or just the toggle?
Not just the toggle. I shouldn't really think about it. So
go to the panel pages. I think are probably better, Clayton. Like panel pages.
Which pages? Panel pages.
Yeah, like
panel. Menu panel.
You're really zoomed in, Ryan. I don't know why, but
yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Like this should be editable. I don't know why it's not. Maybe I screwed this up. It's totally possible. I guess raw. Oh, there we go. It shouldn't be necessary to edit it as a raw though. That's weird. I guess it's treating this as a solid. Anyway, let's not get into the details. But I promise you, I swear on my own life that it will be properly editable ASAP. I didn't realize that we were going to be actually testing that part of it right now. So that's on me. Sorry.
Oh yeah, putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I told you, the technical gremlins are really fickle, and they don't usually like. I gave them milk and cookies. Apparently, that wasn't good enough. Sometimes they want vodka as well.
You engineers in your weird little world.
Yeah, we do live in the strange. Is there anything else that you guys would like to look at? Maybe I could show you a little bit more around the code side of things if you guys are interested. Be happy to do that. Oh yeah, talk a little bit more about like the way that the wallet situation works.
I mean, are you asking for front end feedback now? Separate from this tool?
No. I'm just like curious what people think. What people want to know more about. So like the reason that this thing is able to show up in all of these different places, even though it's apparently not part of the same story, is that when you have your storybook, you've got this this preview file where you essentially can define like a wrapper that holds all of your stories inside of it, and you can give it a different background or anything like that, and so you can essentially then wrap it in all of the different data that you need, which is the same way that this works in the app itself. So because everything is wrapped around with this wallet provider in the stories in the preview, that means that the same wallet data is available to all of the stories, which are over here. So if you connect the wallet in one place, it will be connected in others. And we could also disconnect the wallet here, and then it would be disconnected there as well.
And so we would anticipate, like, for this Devoter DApp being the next thing that we're going to launch, and Evan and I will spend time using Storybook to make copy proposals. Is that all true?
Yeah, I would say so. Well, so I wouldn't require you to write your copy in Storybook and then use that to send it to me. More just that you would be able to use that as a tool to see, like, okay, how does this copy look here? How does it feel? Does it feel right? And then decide, like, okay, cool, I'm happy with this. And then you could send that copy to me in whatever form you want. And then I would put that into the DApp.
Yeah. This is something I've struggled with. I think it just is like a limitation of my own brain, but like when we're trying to do website copy, I really struggle with the kind of like the tooling of how to connect, like you mentioned, a screenshot with arrows pointing at it, right? And then we experimented with using Figma directly, and I just like, I don't know, I just got overwhelmed somehow trying to put copy into Figma. So hopefully this is better.
Easy. Yeah, it's not optimized for that. I mean, what you guys want to do is you want to be able to, and like how I would like to see it set up, is to be able to have a easily editable like document file where you can essentially like say, cool, on this page, on this line, have this, have this, have this. But I will definitely be speaking to you guys. Like I actually was planning to soon in the next couple of weeks have a session with you guys and figure out exactly what would be the easiest way forward. Like because we need a compromise that'll make everyone happy. Yeah. So do you guys have any more questions, feedback, comments? Like I don't know what time it is in the day or evening for you guys, but I don't want to use up anyone's time unnecessarily. I really enjoyed presenting this to you guys. I hope it was like at least mildly interesting.
Sure, very helpful.
Yeah, it was an awesome presentation. Thank you.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, I'm happy to cap it here if you guys are all good. I can talk about this for the next 5 hours, so unless you want that to happen, you're gonna have to indicate that that you're done with me. But thank you guys very much for attending. It was really cool chatting to you guys about this.